That will be a $50 fine.
Misguided community leader.
You are a predator.
What's your emergency?
You have shown no
My neighbor,
remorse.
he's
This
unresponsive. I'm
community needs
scared.
protection from
That will be a $50 fine.
misguided community leader. You are a predator.
This can't be
You have
happening.
shown no
My
remorse.
neighbor, he's
This
unresponsive. I'm
community needs
scared.
protection.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Michael's Story. It's Michael, and today I have a story for you that is so unbelievably petty, so ridiculously escalated, that you're going to have to remind yourself this actually happened. It's a story about how a single piece of colored plastic, a recycling bin, to be exact, led to a 911 call, a full-blown investigation, and the spectacular, karmic collapse of a neighborhood tyrant. We all know the type. The person who gets a little bit of power and thinks they've been crowned monarch of their own little kingdom. In my case, that monarch was our HOA president. Her name was Lozee, and her kingdom was the 3-block radius of our suburban neighborhood, Willow Creek Estates. And let me tell you, she ruled it with an iron fist, a clipboard, and a bottomless well of condescension. But Lozee made a critical mistake. She thought she was untouchable. She pushed and pushed, believing I would just roll over like everyone else. She didn't realize that sometimes, when you push a quiet person too far, you don't break them. You awaken something they didn't even know was there. So grab your popcorn, get comfortable, because you are not going to believe how this one ends. Before the bin, before the fine, and certainly before the flashing lights, my life in Willow Creek Estates was defined by a single, glorious word: quiet. I'd moved here 3 years prior, a deliberate escape from the chaotic symphony of city life. As a freelance graphic designer, my work required focus, a commodity that was in short supply in my old apartment, where the sounds of sirens and neighbors' arguments were the constant soundtrack. Willow Creek, with its uniform, beige houses, surgically manicured lawns, and streets that fell into a reverent hush after 9 p.m., was my sanctuary. The quiet, however, came at a price. The neighborhood was governed by a homeowners association, and its president, Lozee, was the architect of its oppressive tranquility. Lozee was a woman who seemed to have missed her calling as a drill sergeant. She was in her late 50s, with a helmet of blonde hair, so rigid it looked like it could deflect small arms fire, and eyes behind her oversized glasses that didn't just see you, they audited you. She patrolled the streets in a golf cart, a clipboard her constant companion, a perpetual frown etched on her face. Her reign was absolute and built on a foundation of mind-numbing pettiness. I'd seen her use a tape measure to verify that the Henderson family's rose bushes were, in fact, 2 inches taller than the 6-foot maximum stipulated in the covenant. I'd heard she once fined a family because their son's chalk drawing on the driveway was not an HOA-approved color. My next-door neighbor, a sweet elderly widow named Mrs. Gable, was once issued a formal warning because her decorative flag, featuring a cartoon sunflower, was deemed aesthetically disruptive. Most residents simply complied. It was easier to pay the small fines, trim the offending bushes, and live in fear than to incur Lozee's focused wrath. I followed the rules, too. I chose the beigest of the approved beiges for my house trim. My lawn was a pristine carpet of green, mowed to the regulation 3-inch height every Saturday. I was a ghost, a model citizen of this beige kingdom, and that was exactly how I liked it. My peace was a fragile thing, and I wasn't about to risk it. That is, until that fateful Tuesday. It was the end of the month, which for a freelancer meant a whirlwind of deadlines. I was juggling 3 major projects, fueled by lukewarm coffee and the mounting pressure of client expectations. I had been glued to my monitor since sunrise, my world shrinking to the pixels on my screen. The distant, familiar rumble of the recycling truck was a sound that registered in my subconscious but was immediately discarded, like a pop-up ad for the brain. Hours bled into one another. The bright afternoon sun gave way to the soft orange glow of evening, which in turn faded into the deep blue of twilight. It was only when my stomach roared with a ferocity that finally broke through my concentration that I looked at the clock. 9:15 p.m. My entire body ached from being hunched over my desk. And then, a cold knot of dread formed in my gut. The recycling bin. My big, blue, plastic recycling bin was still sitting at the curb. Damn it, I muttered to the empty room. A small thing. An oversight. But in Lozee's kingdom, there were no small things. I pushed my chair back and walked to the front door, already preparing a mental apology. I'd be quick. I'd wheel it into the garage, and hopefully, no one would have noticed. But as I swung the door open, the cool night air hitting my face, I saw that my hope was in vain. There, illuminated by the soft glow of a street lamp, was a scene straight out of a suburban horror film. Lozee, standing sentinel beside my bin. Her arms were crossed, her posture ramrod straight. She wasn't just passing by, she was waiting. She had been waiting. "Michael," she said. Her voice cut through the quiet night like a shard of glass. It wasn't a greeting. It was a summons. I plastered on a friendly, slightly sheepish smile. "Lozee, wow, you startled me." Just grabbing the bin. "It's been one of those days, completely lost track of time." She didn't smile back. Lozee's facial muscles seemed to have atrophied from a lack of pleasant expressions. "Time is a concept I am very familiar with," she said, tapping a manicured finger on the face of her watch. "It is currently 9:17 p.m. As you are no doubt aware, given that you signed the same 300-page covenant as every other resident of this community, Section 4, Subsection C, Paragraph 2 is perfectly clear. All waste receptacles must be removed from public view no later than 8 p.m. on the designated day of collection." She had, of course, recited it from memory. I felt a surge of irritation but pushed it down. "You're absolutely right. My apologies. It was a complete oversight on my part. I'll just get this out of your way. Won't happen again, I promise." I reached for the handle of the bin. "Stop," she commanded, and her tone was so sharp I actually flinched. "An apology doesn't rectify a violation, Michael. The rules are the threads that hold the fabric of our community together. If we start pulling at those threads, even the smallest ones, the whole tapestry unravels. What's next? Commercial vehicles parked in driveways? Unapproved satellite dishes? We must maintain standards." I straightened up, my fake smile dissolving. The absurdity of her metaphor was staggering. We were talking about a plastic bin, not the fall of civilization. "Lozee, with all due respect, it's an empty bin that was out for an extra hour and a half. I don't think the fabric of the community is at risk of unraveling just yet." A thin, reptilian smile touched her lips. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated power. That is precisely the kind of cavalier attitude that leads to decline. It is not your place to interpret the severity of a violation. It is your place to adhere to the rules, as it is my place to enforce them. She made a crisp, deliberate checkmark on the sheet of paper attached to her clipboard. "You can expect a formal notice in your mailbox by tomorrow's post. That will be a $50 fine." $50. The number hung in the air between us. It was so utterly disproportionate, so blatantly a power trip, that I was momentarily stunned into silence. I just stared at her immovable hair, her condescending smile, her clipboard of judgment. "You're not serious." I finally managed, my voice coming out flatter than I intended. "Oh, I am deadly serious," she replied, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, as if she were letting me in on a great secret. "Integrity, Michael. It's what separates Willow Creek from those other neighborhoods. We have standards." With a final, dismissive nod, she turned and marched away, her pastel tracksuit a beacon of tyranny in the quiet darkness. I stood there for a long time, the cold handle of the bin in my hand, my mind reeling. This wasn't about standards or integrity. This was about a woman who derived her only sense of worth from exercising petty control over others. And I, in my harmless, overworked state, had just become her latest subject. I wheeled the bin into the garage, the plastic wheels rumbling on the concrete like a drumbeat of war. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, my indignation growing with each retelling. The next morning, the envelope was there, nestled between a Pottery Barn catalog and some junk mail. It was crisp, white, and felt heavy with officialdom. The violation notice was a masterpiece of bureaucratic nonsense, detailing my infraction with cold, impersonal language. At the bottom, in an aggressive bold font, "Fine, $50. Payment is due within 10 business days to avoid further penalties." I held the piece of paper in my hand. I thought about the $50. It wasn't the money. I could afford it. It was the principle. It was the injustice. It was the idea of rewarding this woman's petty crusade with my hard-earned cash. I thought about Mrs. Gable and her flag, the Hendersons and their rose bushes. We were all just frogs in a pot of slowly boiling water, and Lozee was cranking up the heat. In that moment, standing in my sun-drenched kitchen, I made a decision. A quiet, definitive decision that would alter the course of my quiet, definitive life. I walked over to the trash can, lifted the lid, and dropped the violation notice inside. It landed with a soft, satisfying rustle. I was not going to pay it. I had no grand plan. I had no strategy. I just knew that I could not, reward her behavior. It was a small act of defiance, a silent declaration of independence. I had no idea that I had just pulled the pin on a grenade, and the peaceful, beige world I had so carefully cultivated was about to be blown to smithereens. The first 10 days passed in a deceptive quiet. I half expected Lozee to be camped out on my lawn, but she was conspicuously absent. I began to hope that maybe, just maybe, she had bigger fish to fry and had forgotten about my $50 act of defiance. It was a foolish hope. On the 11th day, a new envelope arrived. This one had a bright red second notice stamped on it. Inside, the language was sharper. My fine had been compounded with a late fee, bringing the total to a neat $100. The letter also contained a new, more ominous sentence. Please be advised that failure to resolve this outstanding violation will result in further escalation as per the Willow Creek HOA Covenant, Article 12, Section B. I read Article 12, Section B. It was a vaguely worded catch-all that gave the board the power to take any and all necessary actions to ensure compliance. It was a blank check for tyranny. I tossed that letter in the trash as well. This, it seemed, was the official start of the Cold War. Lozee's tactics shifted from direct confrontation to a campaign of psychological warfare. Her golf cart became a permanent fixture on my block. I'd be working at my desk and catch a flash of pastel in my peripheral vision as she glided past my house, her speed deliberately slow. I'd be out watering my petunias, and she'd park across the street, just watching me, her face an unreadable mask behind her sunglasses. The notes started appearing. A yellow sticky note on my car windshield. Your vehicle is parked 3.5 inches from the curb. The recommended distance is 6 to 12 inches for optimal street cleaning access. Please be more considerate. Another, tucked into my mailbox. It has been observed that your porch light fixture may be harboring a spider web. Please see Covenant Section 8, Exterior Maintenance and Cleanliness. She was trying to bait me to find another, more concrete violation to pin on me. I became obsessively meticulous in response. My car was parked with geometric precision. I bought a special tool to eliminate spider webs. I even found myself on my hands and knees one Saturday, using gardening shears to ensure no single blade of grass on the edge of my driveway was longer than any other. My property was a fortress of compliance, and my perfection was driving her mad. The tipping point, the moment the Cold War turned hot, came on a Saturday afternoon about a month after the bin incident. It was a beautiful day, and I was trying to enjoy it by watching a movie, the volume turned up loud, the windows open to let in the breeze. Then came the knock. A sharp, insistent rap on my front door. I muted the TV and peered through the peephole. It was Lozee, clipboard in hand, a thunderous expression on her face. I was not in the mood. I had nothing to say to her. So I did what any sane person would do. I ignored it. I unmuted the movie and sank back into my couch. The knocking came again, louder this time, more frantic. Michael, I know you're in there. Her voice, shrill and piercing, cut through the movie's soundtrack. I can see your car in the driveway. We need to discuss your delinquent account. This is an official HOA matter, Michael. You cannot ignore the board. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I imagined myself on a deserted island, far from HOAs and power-tripping neighbors. The knocking finally stopped. A few minutes of blessed silence followed. I let myself relax, thinking she had finally given up. That's when I saw them. The flashing lights. Red and blue, pulsing rhythmically, painting strobing patterns across my living room walls. My blood went cold. I scrambled to the window, my heart hammering against my ribs. Parked at my curb were 2 police cruisers. 2 officers were walking up my driveway, their expressions a mixture of boredom and duty. And trotting behind them, pointing at my front door with a look of righteous vindication, was Lozee. She hadn't just knocked. She hadn't just yelled. She had called 911. A wave of incandescent rage washed over me, so hot it felt like it would melt my bones. This was it. This was a line that could not be uncrossed. I yanked the door open before the officer could even raise his hand to knock. "Can I help you, officers?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. The taller of the two officers, a man with a weary face and a thick mustache, spoke first. "Good afternoon, sir. Are you Michael?" "I am," I said, my eyes flicking to Lozee, who was hovering behind him like a vulture. "We received a call for a wellness check," the officer said, his voice flat and professional. He gestured with his thumb towards Lozee. "The caller stated that you were being unresponsive and she had reason to be concerned for your safety after you failed to answer your door." The sheer, unmitigated gall of it left me speechless for a moment. A wellness check, a tactic used for elderly people who haven't been seen for days, now being deployed as a cudgel in a $50 dispute. I found my voice. "Officer, with all due respect, I am perfectly fine. This woman," I said, pointing directly at Lozee, "is the president of our homeowners association. I have a disputed fine with her that I have refused to pay. She was just banging on my door, harassing me. I chose not to engage with her. She is abusing city resources and your valuable time to intimidate me. This is not a wellness check, it's a shakedown." The officer's eyes met mine, and I saw a flicker of understanding, of profound weariness. He'd seen this 1,000 times. He turned his head slowly to face Lozee. "Ma'am, is this true? Is the context of this call related to an HOA dispute?" Lozee's face, which had been a mask of smug concern, began to crumble. She flushed a blotchy red. "Well, yes, but that's not the point. I was genuinely concerned. He's been very reclusive lately, and when he didn't answer, well, what was I supposed to think?" "It could have been anything," she stammered, her performance falling apart under the officer's steady gaze. The officer let out a long, slow sigh. It was the sigh of a man who dealt with the absolute worst of humanity on a daily basis, and this was somehow even more annoying. "Ma'am, the 911 system is for life-threatening emergencies only. A disagreement over neighborhood regulations does not qualify as an emergency. In fact, filing a false report is a misdemeanor. Do not call this number again unless you have a genuine, good-faith belief that someone's life is in immediate danger. Do you understand me?" Lozee's face went from red to pale. The word misdemeanor hung in the air. "Yes, officer," she mumbled, staring at her feet. The officer gave me a curt, almost apologetic nod. "Sorry to have bothered you, sir. Try to have a good day." He and his partner turned and walked back to their cars, leaving me and Lozee alone on the porch. By now, the spectacle had drawn an audience. Curtains were twitching in every window up and down the street. My next-door neighbor, Mr. Henderson, was standing on his lawn, pretending to inspect his sprinkler heads. The illusion of Willow Creek's quiet harmony was shattered, replaced by the delicious, undeniable thrill of neighborhood drama. Lozee's humiliation was complete. She had called in the cavalry to prove her power, and instead, they had publicly rebuked her. The look on her face was no longer one of anger or authority. It was pure, distilled hatred. "You," she hissed, her voice a low, venomous whisper. "You are going to regret this, Michael. You have no idea what you've just started." She spun on her heel and stalked away, her back rigid with fury. I watched her go, and for the first time, I wasn't angry anymore. I felt a strange sense of clarity. She was right. She had started something. She thought she was threatening me, but what she had actually given me was a purpose. This was no longer about a recycling bin. It was no longer about me. It was about freeing an entire neighborhood from the clutches of a petty dictator. Lozee thought she was the queen of Willow Creek, but she had forgotten a fundamental rule of power. The higher you build your throne, the further you have to fall. And I was about to start digging out the foundation. The 911 incident was a catalyst. It transformed my passive resistance into an active quest for justice. The anger I felt had been forged into a cold, sharp instrument of resolve. Lozee had tried to use the law as her personal bludgeon, and in doing so, had revealed the depths of her desperation and malice. My objective was no longer simply to defy her, it was to dethrone her. I knew this couldn't be a frontal assault. Arguing with her was like wrestling with a pig in mud. You both get dirty, and the pig likes it. I had to operate in the shadows. I had to find a real, undeniable breach of her duties, something so significant that even her staunchest supporters couldn't ignore it. My crusade began in the most unglamorous of places, the Willow Creek HOA website, a poorly designed relic of the early 2000s. I downloaded every document I could find, covenants, bylaws, amendments, and years' worth of monthly meeting minutes. I spent my nights poring over these documents, highlighting and cross-referencing, fueled by a potent combination of coffee and spite. The language was dense, the content mind-numbingly dull, but I treated it like an archaeological dig, searching for a fossil of misconduct. For weeks, all I found was a meticulously documented history of her oppressive rule. But then, I stumbled upon the financial summaries. Each year, our dues increased by a steady 5%, a fact Lozee always announced with a grim expression at the annual meeting, blaming inflation and rising vendor costs. The summaries themselves were masterpieces of obfuscation. Large, round numbers were allocated to vague categories like landscaping services, community upkeep, pool maintenance, and administrative fees. There were no invoices, no contractor names, no itemized breakdowns. It was a black box. Our bylaws clearly stated that any homeowner, upon written request, had the right to inspect the association's detailed financial ledgers. This was my opening. I drafted a polite, professionally worded email to the HOA board, Lozee, and her two loyal rubber stampers, a timid man named Barry and a sharp-tongued woman named Janice, formally requesting access to the full, itemized financial statements for the past 3 fiscal years, as was my right. Lozee's reply came less than an hour later. It was curt and dismissive. "Dear Mr. Michael," it began, "the annual financial summaries have been distributed to all homeowners and are deemed sufficient. The board does not have the resources to accommodate individual requests for detailed breakdowns. Rest assured, all expenditures are reviewed and approved by the board for the benefit of the community." It was a blatant, and likely illegal, stonewall, and it was the first time I felt the electric thrill of certainty. I was on the right track. She was hiding something, but I couldn't do this alone. I needed allies. I started by visiting Mrs. Gable. I found her in her garden, sadly pruning a rose bush. I told her the whole story, from the bin to the 911 call. When I finished, her gentle face was set with a resolve I had never seen before. "She called the police?" she whispered, her gardening gloves still covered in dirt. "That woman has the audacity of the devil himself. What can I do to help?" She was my first recruit. My next stop was the Henderson house. Mark Henderson was a CPA, a numbers guy with a keen eye for discrepancies. He had been on the receiving end of Lozee's wrath over his son's basketball hoop. When I laid out my suspicions about the finances and showed him Lozee's email, his professional curiosity turned into cold fury. "Deemed sufficient? That's not how it works," he said, shaking his head. "This is a classic tactic for hiding mismanagement or worse. Vague categories, no itemization, refusing access to records. These are giant, waving red flags. Michael, if you can get me those books, I'll find out where every single penny is going." Our small resistance cell was formed. Me, the accidental instigator, Mrs. Gable, the moral heart of our operation, and Mark, our financial weapon. We began meeting in secret, twice a week in my dining room, our voices low. We needed more people, a critical mass to force Lozee's hand. Mrs. Gable, it turned out, was the key. She had lived in the neighborhood for 30 years and knew everyone. She became our quiet ambassador, visiting trusted neighbors, sharing our story, and gauging their support. The fear of Lozee was palpable, but the story of the 911 call was so outrageous that it began to crack the facade of fear. Our breakthrough came from the most unexpected of sources. Barry, one of the 2 other board members. I had always dismissed him as Lozee's spineless yes-man. But one evening, as I was walking my dog, he practically darted out from behind a hedge to intercept me. He was sweating and couldn't make eye contact. "Michael, I need to talk to you," he hissed, his eyes darting around nervously. I can't go along with this new project. It's not right." "What new project, Barry?" I asked, stopping. "The pool," he whispered, wiping his brow. "Lozee is pushing for a complete renovation of the community pool and clubhouse. New decking, new filtration system, the works. She's railroading it through. The quote she wants us to sign is for $500,000. I whistled. "That's a fortune. Our reserve funds can't cover that." "Exactly," he said, his voice cracking. She's proposing a special assessment. $2,000 from every single household. She's going to announce it next month. People are going to lose their minds. Did you get other bids? I asked. That's the thing, Barry said, finally looking at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and guilt. She won't. She says she has a trusted contractor, a company called Prestige Property Solutions, and they're the only one she'll work with. She won't even let us see the other bids that came in. Michael, something feels really wrong about this. I thanked Barry, told him to stay safe, and rushed home, my heart pounding. Prestige Property Solutions. I typed the name into my computer. The company was a registered LLC in our state. I paid the $20 fee to pull their corporate filings. The documents were sparse. The company had only been formed 2 years ago. The registered agent and sole officer was listed as a man named Martin Wexler. The name was a dead end. I ran background searches, property records, nothing. I was about to give up for the night when I had a different idea. I searched for Martin Wexler not in official records, but in social media and old newspaper archives. And then, on the third page of search results, I found it. A digital copy of a wedding announcement from a small local newspaper, dated 10 years ago. Wexler Lozee Nuptials, the headline read. I clicked the link, my hand trembling slightly. The grainy photo showed a smiling couple. The groom was Martin Wexler. The bride was a woman named Susan. The article mentioned her family in attendance, including her older sister and matron of honor. Lozee. I leaned back in my chair, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. The contractor was her brother-in-law. The entire scheme laid itself bare in my mind. The years of inflated dues, the vague accounting, the refusal to show the books. She was using our HOA as a personal slush fund, funneling our money to her own family through a grossly overpriced, no-bid contract. The $500,000 pool project wasn't for the community's benefit. It was a massive payday for her family, and likely a massive kickback for herself. I immediately called Mark and Mrs. Gable. The game had changed. We weren't just fighting a petty tyrant anymore. We were uncovering a conspiracy. We had her. All we needed now was to find the perfect way to expose her. Our strategy shifted. We used the information from Barry to get ahead of her announcement. We quietly solicited 2 other bids for the exact same pool renovation from 2 of the most reputable firms in the city. The bids came back, one for $240,000, the other for $265,000. Both were nearly half the price of her brother-in-law's quote. We now had the smoking gun, the motive, and the proof of the crime. We drafted a formal petition, citing the bylaws that allowed homeowners to call an emergency meeting. We laid out our demand, an immediate halt to the pool project and a full, independent, forensic audit of the HOA's finances. We spent a weekend going door to door. With the story of the family connection and the competing bids, the fear that had held the neighborhood captive evaporated, replaced by a wave of righteous anger. We didn't just get the required number of signatures. We got signatures from over 60% of the households. We served the petition to Lozee at the start of the next public board meeting. She was in the middle of a monologue about lawn decorations when I walked to the front and placed the stack of papers in front of her. She looked down at the petition, then at the dozens of angry faces staring back at her. For the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine fear in her eyes. Her ironclad control was slipping through her fingers. She tried to dismiss it, to claim it was procedurally improper, but the roar from the crowd was undeniable. She was cornered. She had no choice but to schedule the emergency meeting. In the week leading up to that meeting, a final, devastating piece of the puzzle fell into place. A neighbor who worked as a paralegal at the county courthouse, a man Lozee had once fined for having a visibly rusted barbecue grill, did some digging of his own out of pure spite. He found what he was looking for in the public property records. Lozee and her husband were in dire financial straits. There were multiple liens against their property for thousands of dollars in unpaid state and federal taxes. And then, the knockout blow. Their home, the immaculate beige castle from which she ruled, was in active pre-foreclosure. The bank had filed a lease pendens notice a month ago. The revelation was like a bolt of lightning. Her desperation, her frantic push for the $500,000 contract, it wasn't just about greed. It was about survival. She was trying to orchestrate a massive kickback from her brother-in-law to save her own house from being seized by the bank. She was willing to plunder the entire community to patch the holes in her own sinking ship. The stage was set for the emergency meeting. It was no longer just about exposing a tyrant. It was about watching a criminal's world completely and utterly collapse. The night of the emergency meeting, the community clubhouse, a building usually reserved for sad birthday parties and sparsely attended yoga classes, was filled to capacity. The air was thick with a tension you could taste, a mixture of anger, anticipation, and the undeniable thrill of seeing a monarch face a reckoning. Every chair was taken, and people stood 3 deep along the walls. This wasn't just a meeting, it was a tribunal. Lozee sat at the head table, a pathetic imitation of her former self. She was flanked by Barry, who looked like he was about to be physically ill, and Janice, who wore a defiant scowl, the last loyal soldier in a fallen army. Lozee attempted to project an image of authority, but it was a brittle facade. Her hands trembled slightly as she shuffled her papers, and her eyes, which usually scanned the room with an air of superior judgment, now darted about nervously, unable to meet anyone's gaze. As per the rules, the petitioners were allowed to speak first. I was nominated. I walked to the podium, a folder of documents in my hand, my heart pounding a steady, determined rhythm. I looked out at the faces of my neighbors, Mrs. Gable giving me a small, encouraging nod, the Hendersons looking on with grim satisfaction. "Good evening," I began, my voice clear and steady. "We are here tonight because a significant number of us have lost faith in the leadership of this board and the management of our community's finances. For years, we have accepted rising dues and paid fines for minor infractions, trusting that it was all for the good of the neighborhood. We have discovered that our trust has been profoundly misplaced." I calmly and methodically laid out our case. I started with the pattern of financial obfuscation, showing copies of the vague summary reports. Then, I moved to the pool project. The board, under President Lozee's sole direction, has been pushing for a $500,000 renovation to be funded by a massive special assessment on every one of us. We were told this was a necessary expense with a trusted vendor. I paused, letting the weight of my next words settle. What we were not told is that the vendor, Prestige Property Solutions, is solely owned and operated by Martin Wexler. And Martin Wexler, I held up a printed copy of the wedding announcement, is Lozee's brother-in-law. A collective gasp went through the room, followed by an explosion of angry murmurs. Lozee shot to her feet. "This is an outrageous personal attack. My family connections have no bearing on my professional duties," she shouted, her voice shrill with panic. "Then perhaps you can explain this," I said, placing the 2 other bids on the document projector. The figures glowed on the screen behind me, $240,000 and $265,000. These are bids for the exact same work, from 2 highly reputable firms. They are nearly half the price of your brother-in-law's quote. So I ask you, is it a coincidence that the only bid you would consider was double the market rate, and from a member of your own family? The room erupted. People were shouting questions, demanding answers. Lozee was completely overwhelmed, sputtering about slander and incomplete information. It was then that Mark Henderson stood up and walked to the podium. He took over, shifting the focus from the family connection to the cold, hard numbers. As a CPA, he spoke with an authority that silenced the room. "This isn't just about one bad contract," he explained, his voice ringing with professional indignation. "This is about a pattern. The refusal to provide detailed financial records is a violation of our bylaws, and it is a tactic used for one reason, to hide something. We are formally calling for a motion to freeze all non-essential HOA spending and to immediately commission a full, independent forensic audit of the last 5 years of our association's finances." The motion was seconded by a roar of voices. The vote wasn't even close. It was nearly unanimous. The crowd had turned on her completely. But the final, soul-crushing blow was yet to come. As the vote was being tallied, a quiet man named Mr. Chun, who lived 2 doors down from Lozee, stood up. Mr. Chun was a man of few words, whom Lozee had once fined because his welcome mat was a non-approved shade of brown. He was holding a single piece of paper. "Perhaps," Mr. Chun said, his voice surprisingly carrying across the silent room, "this will shed some light on our president's financial urgency." He walked to the front and placed his document on the projector. It was a copy of a public legal filing. The words at the top were large and unmistakable: Notice of Foreclosure. It listed Lozee's address. This was posted on her front door yesterday afternoon, Mr. Chen stated simply. It seems President Lozee has been dealing with some personal financial troubles. If the room had been quiet before, it was now a vacuum. The air was sucked out of the space. Every single person in that room understood. The lies, the fraud, the special assessment. It was all a desperate, pathetic attempt to steal enough money from her neighbors to save her own house. Every eye in the room, over 100 pairs of them, drilled into Lozee. The mask of the HOA president, the shield of the neighborhood tyrant, the facade of the suburban queen, it all disintegrated in that moment. She was exposed, stripped bare, revealed as nothing more than a common thief, a desperate fraud. Her face, which had been flushed with anger, turned a ghastly, waxy white. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish, but no sound came out. Her eyes, wide with pure animal terror, darted from face to face, seeking an ally, an escape, but finding only a sea of cold, hard judgment. This was the moment her world ended. The panic hit her like a physical blow. She began to hyperventilate, her chest heaving. With a strangled cry, she shoved her chair back. It screeched horribly against the linoleum floor and toppled over. And then she ran. She didn't excuse herself. She didn't walk. She fled. She bolted for the exit, stumbling through the stunned crowd, her reign of terror ending not with a bang, but with a pathetic, cowardly, panicked sprint into the night, running from the mess she had made, running toward the foreclosure sign on her own front door. In the wake of Lozee's spectacular public collapse, a profound sense of liberation swept through Willow Creek. It was as if a dark cloud that had been hanging over the neighborhood for years had finally dissipated. The emergency meeting concluded with the swift and unanimous removal of Lozee and Janice from the board. Barry, seeing his own complicity laid bare, had already tendered his resignation via email before the meeting was even over. An interim board was elected on the spot. Mark Henderson as treasurer, Mrs. Gable as secretary, and somehow, I was voted in as the new president. Our first order of business was the forensic audit. The results were sickening. Lozee's corruption was deeper than we had ever imagined. For 5 years, she had been systematically bleeding the community dry. Overpayments to vendors who kicked back cash, fake invoices for consulting services, personal expenses billed to the HOA credit card. The audit uncovered over $80,000 in embezzled funds, all before the $500,000 pool scam she was planning. We turned the entire, meticulously documented file over to the district attorney's office. The HOA was now the primary witness in a criminal case against its former president. Lozee's downfall was as swift as it was complete. The foreclosure on her house was finalized. Watching the bank officials change the locks on her front door was a surreal moment for the whole neighborhood. The for sale sign was soon replaced by a stark, humiliating bank-owned one. We saw her and her husband packing their lives into a dingy rental truck over the course of a week. She looked haggard and broken, a ghost haunting the ruins of her own life. She never spoke to anyone, never looked anyone in the eye. The day she drove away for the last time, a quiet but palpable sense of relief settled over the street. Legally, she faced charges of felony grand larceny and fraud. Faced with the mountain of evidence, she took a plea deal, avoiding jail time but being sentenced to 5 years of probation and ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA. A check for $80,000 arrived a few months later, money she likely had to borrow from the same family she had tried to enrich. With the darkness lifted, Willow Creek began to heal. Our new board's motto was transparency and reason. We posted every invoice and every financial statement online for all to see. We held town halls, not just meetings. We systematically went through the bylaws and, with community input, voted to strike down the most oppressive and ridiculous rules. Wind chimes were welcome. Chalk art was encouraged. The regulation height of rose bushes was abolished. The atmosphere changed. The fear was gone, replaced by a genuine sense of community. People started talking again. A neighborhood block party was organized, the first in over a decade. For the first time, Willow Creek felt less like a beige kingdom and more like a home. I never wanted to be a leader. I was just a quiet guy who wanted to be left alone. But Lozee, in her arrogance, had forced my hand. She had picked a fight over a $50 fine for a recycling bin. and in her obsessive need to win that tiny, insignificant battle, she had lost everything. Her home, her reputation, her freedom. It was a stunning testament to the fact that arrogance is a poison that rots from the inside out. Sometimes, when I'm taking my recycling bin to the curb on a Tuesday evening, I think of her. I think about how one small act of standing up for what's right can cause a chain reaction, exposing the rot beneath a pristine surface. Lozee built her throne on a foundation of fear and petty rules, but it was a house of cards, and it took just one person, refusing to fold, to bring it all crashing down. So what do you all think? Have you ever had to deal with an out-of-control HOA or a neighborhood tyrant like Lozee? Let me know your own stories down in the comments below. It's always fascinating to see how common these power trips really are. As always, thank you for tuning in to Michael's story. If you enjoyed this tale of karmic justice, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss the next story. Until then, stay safe, be good to your neighbors, unless they're like Lozee, and I'll see you in the next video.